Alabama enters into year 3 under Kalen DeBoer. The expectations are still sky high for this Crimson Tide team, despite losing tons of talent to the draft and the transfer portal, per the usual now for Alabama. But DeBoer obviously has his ups and downs, but the pressure is still on. I thought Alabama had a fairly successful year last year. They went 11-4. They had 5 top 25 victories, including 4 in a row at one point. The great road win versus Georgia, a huge comeback win on the road in the college football playoff versus Oklahoma. But with DeBoer, throughout all of the success, there are still some extremely low and disappointing moments. To start the season, a blowout loss to Florida State that ended up finishing, I believe, 4-8 or 3-9. That Florida State team was nowhere near the talent or the poise of Alabama. Honestly, no excuse there. It was a road game. I understand it. It's the first game of the season, but retrospectively looking at Alabama, the biggest problem was the run game, and you saw it in their losses. The loss to Georgia in the SEC championship game, a 28-7 blowout. Alabama basically had no yards on the ground. And then, of course, the slaughter in the college football playoff versus Indiana. Throughout all of the highlights from DeBoer's first couple of years, there's just as many, if not more, lowlights. And that's really the problem that I think Alabama fans have had with DeBoer so far. But let's take a look at this season. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this Alabama team looks like. To me, this is the most DeBoer-esque team that we've seen so far with the Crimson Tide. But looking back last year, the biggest problems was the run game. They were 127th in the country in yards per rush. They were also 130th in rush yards per game in the FBS, which is the worst run game in Alabama football history. That tells you a lot. But here's the thing. Just as much as a negative that I offer you with the run game, I also offer you a positive. I've never seen a team with that piss poor of a run game that went on to win 11 games, make it to a playoff, win a playoff game, and beat 5 top 25 teams. So looking at the coaching staff here, we've got Kalen DeBoer in year 3. He has a 20-8 record, which I will tell you anywhere else other than the top programs in the country, they're considering building a statue of this guy. The fact that he's at Alabama really just says all you need to hear. The expectations are just much higher than going 20-8. Nick Saban, I believe he was close to 20-8 in his first couple seasons, but the difference was Nick Saban inherited an absolute mess with so many recruiting restrictions from the previous Alabama administration, whereas DeBoer inherited an almost perfect college football playoff team with a starting quarterback and a bunch of first-round draft picks on the team. That being said, offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb enters into year 2. Now, I will say, Ryan Grubb followed Kalen DeBoer from multiple places, including Washington. He went to the Seahawks for one season to be the OC, got fired, and now he returned to Alabama last year. I got to say, the offense regressed last year, statistically speaking. They went down in scoring, yards per game, pass yards per game, red zone scoring percentage. I would really like to see Alabama take a step back in the right direction. Maybe this was just a personnel issue last year, but I actually thought that the personnel last year fit DeBoer's scheme damn near perfectly. I don't necessarily know how that will pan out this season, but that being said, Ryan Grubb in year 2, I look for the offense to be a little bit better. Going to the defensive side, you got Kane Womack. He's also entering in year 3. Now, in my opinion, Womack, yes, there are some struggles at times, especially in those losses. It's like Alabama's defense can't stop the bleeding, but he has improved the defensive statistics both seasons, starting with year 1, going into year 2, and now into year 3. I expect Alabama's defense to return to that solidified top 10, top 15 area. Now, obviously, they're playing some tougher competition than they were in the Nick Saban era, but that being said, Alabama last year was 22nd in scoring, 15th in pass yards per game, 29th in sacks percentage. Where I want to see them capitalize more is takeaways. They were only 57th, but I'll get into that in a little bit. That's the coaching staff. Now let's talk about what they've lost throughout the offseason. With the NFL draft, it was a ton. per the usual for Alabama, as I said earlier. Caden Proctor, Ty Simpson, these guys were both top 15 picks, I believe. Proctor was a 40-game starter and an All-American for Alabama. Ty Simpson last year, a one-year starter for the Crimson Tide, but a veteran of the program. 3,500 yards passing, 28 touchdowns. Jeremy Bernard, who followed Kalen DeBoer from Washington, he was a big part of the offense last year. 862 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. Had a bunch more rushing as well as I think a couple passing touchdowns, or at least a couple passing attempts. But the rest of this team, a lot of role players, but still solidified starters that had been there for years. Justin Jefferson at linebacker, Parker Brailsford, who followed DeBoer from Washington. He had 27 starts for the Crimson Tide. Damani Jackson, who transferred in from USC. Tim Keenan. But in my opinion, one of the most important losses that doesn't really get talked about a lot because he wasn't drafted, but it was Deontay Lawson. He's been a starter and a staple of Alabama's defense since Nick Saban was the head coach. Last year had 45 tackles, 4 pass deflected, 2 forced fumbles, but he just flies the football. He was the play caller for the defense. I think Alabama's going to be missing him a lot this season. In the transfer portal, there were a few guys that, in my opinion, deserve some recognition. Isaiah Horton, or as I like to call him, Horton Here's a Who. He had 511 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was the red zone threat for Alabama last year. He transfers to Texas A&M. James Smith and Keon Keeley, both of these guys provided a lot of depth on the defensive line. They combined for 22 solo tackles, 5.5 sacks. They transfer to Ohio State with James Smith, and Keon Keeley goes to Notre Dame. These are huge losses on the defensive side of the football. Overall, I believe I'm counting up 4, 8, 12, 14 starters and significant role players are transferring or getting drafted to the NFL here for Alabama. There is a good amount of returning production. Let me mention a few of these guys. Ryan Coleman-Williams, he's not 17 anymore, but I think he's going to have a huge year 3 here. He had a step back last year, just 689 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, struggled with injuries and catching the football. Offensive guard Michael Carroll, who I believe was a true freshman last year, started 6 games, played in all 14 last year, or 15 for the Crimson Tide last season. I expect him to have a big year. Bray Hubbard, this is probably the guy on the defensive side of the football in the defensive back group that is probably the biggest playmaker outside of maybe his partner in safety, Keon Sabb. Bray Hubbard last year, 47 solo tackles, 8 passes defended, 4 interceptions, huge playmaker. The secondary, in my opinion, is the most talented group of Alabama's team this season. They've got 4 returning big-time starters in Hubbard, Xavier Brown, Keon Sabb, and Dejon Lee, who I believe was a true freshman last year. But coming off the edge, this is the guy that I'm most excited about. He was not a full-time starter last year. As a matter of fact, he had to earn his stripes in the middle of the season. Yanze Pierre. I think he's the next great Alabama edge rusher. 39 tackles, 8 sacks last season. And like I said, this is a guy who was not a starter for the majority of the season. Yanze Pierre is going to have a breakout year. I'm super excited to see what he has to offer. But then, so these are the returning productions, guys. Now we're going to talk about some of the transfers in. There are only a couple of note. Caleb Woodson, he's going to be the new middle linebacker to replace Deontay Lawson. Last year at Virginia Tech, 27 solo tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. Not necessarily a star-studded resume, but a guy that has a lot of athleticism. And with the Kane Womack defenses, that's kind of what you expect. You're not expecting these Terrence Cody-esque players that you saw at Alabama back in 2009, 2010. They're not going to out-beef you. They play with speed, they play with poise, discipline. They are specifically about really niche roles, and they fill them great. They fly to the football. That's what Kane Womack defenses are all about. Devin Tompkins comes in from USC. You know, Alabama's kind of had a USC transfer portal pipeline recently. I thought that was interesting. 18 tackles for the Trojans last year, 6.5 tackles for loss. He's going to have to be a run stopper for Alabama this year. Going to try to replace some of that defensive line depth that they lost with James Smith and Keon Keeley, and as well as one of the captains of the defense, Tim Keenan, who also goes to the NFL. Then last but not least, this guy's injured right now, but I expect him to have a large role when he returns, maybe by the middle of the season. Noah Rogers comes in from NC State, just 441 yards, 2 touchdowns last season, but I expect this guy from NC State to be a huge playmaker. He's got a great frame. I think he's going to be a strong outside receiver for Alabama this year. Noah Rogers, keep a lookout on the name. I believe he got hurt in the spring game or right before the spring game and is expected to miss training camp at the beginning of the season. So by the middle of the year, that guy should be making some plays for Alabama. Now, those are all of the roster changes. Let's talk about some of the storylines here. For starters, this is by far the most important to me, the run game. Last year's run game was one of the worst in program history, if not the worst. I believe I said earlier it was the worst, and I stand by that. If any of the offense is going to improve, it has to start with the run game. It's hard to believe that it will get better with the amount of talent that Alabama lost in the offensive line, but maybe fresh legs, fresh minds, new bodies will make it a much better concept, as well as Ryan Grubb coming into year 2. There's a lot of different things that kind of situationally play into Alabama's favor in terms of running the football. Quite frankly, it can't get worse than it was last season. And once again, considering how bad the run game was, it's hard to believe that Alabama went 11-4. Now, the other storyline that I want to follow is the mid to late part of the season is going to be the main test for Alabama. They have a 4-game stretch where they play 4 top 25 teams at Tennessee, at LSU, Texas A&M. These are some really tough games. This is a first look at DeBoer and his roster. Honestly speaking, I don't know if Alabama can get past all of those games without some kind of blemish on their record. It's really hard to win 4 top 25 games in a row. DeBoer did it last year, so there's a high chance, or not a high chance, there's a chance he could do it again. But the third storyline that I want to follow is this is really DeBoer's team. This is the most DeBoer-esque roster that he's had so far. It's definitely not the most talented. It might even be one of the least talented rosters in the last 15 years. But that's not to say, that's not like a blemish against DeBoer's record. That's more of a reality of the spreading out of talent due to NIL, the transfer portal. It is really hard to retain talent that sits on the bench. Alabama used to have a 3 deep with NFL guys playing on the scout team. You're not really going to see that anymore in college football, even at the programs that are killing it in NIL, like Texas and Ohio State and Texas A&M. They don't have NFL guys on their scout team. They've got guys that would be starters at Akron, okay? Kalen DeBoer has got his roster. He might have a depth issue right now, but I think there's a lot of teams that have depth issues right now. We'll see what this looks like. This is going to be kind of his first real experience with a roster that fits his scheme in the SEC. I'm curious to see how it goes. I've got faith that he has confidence in his way of doing things, especially considering that looking at his resume at Alabama, he has some great wins versus Georgia in year 1, Georgia in year 2, Oklahoma in the playoff game. I'm impressed with some of his games. As a matter of fact, the LSU win 2 seasons ago with Jalen Milroe, that was his most dominant victory ever, maybe in his time as head coach at Washington and Alabama, or considering top 25 competition, if you understand what I'm saying here. That being said, the last storyline that I want to follow is this job in Tuscaloosa is a pressure cooker. The standard at Alabama is playoffs or bust. There's been too many disappointments in DeBoer's first couple of years to celebrate the achievements. Is this the year that the floodgates open one way or the other? Is this the year that Alabama goes 12-0, wins the SEC, and tries to make it back to a national championship? Or is this a season that Alabama goes 8-4, or God forbid 7-5, and the mob starts to line up outside DeBoer's house to get him out of Tuscaloosa? Now let's take a look at the schedule, because I think Alabama has, outside of those 4 games in a row, the ranked games in a row, they've got a really favorable schedule, especially to start the season. East Carolina at home, at Kentucky on the road, Florida State at home, South Carolina at home, Mississippi State on the road. All 5 of these programs are nowhere near the level that Alabama's at. Now, Alabama has struggled against a couple of these teams in the last couple of years. Florida State, they lost. South Carolina, they almost lost. I believe they've almost lost it twice now. That being said, though, this is at home. Alabama should be playing better at home than they ever have under DeBoer this season. At Mississippi State, that program, even though they had a 5-7 season last year, they have a much tougher road this season. And quite frankly, Mississippi State played out of their minds. Now, I like their quarterback. Their offense under Jeff Lebby has started to improve. I expect that to be more of the same. But in terms of you lining up against Alabama, you have to, in this scenario, say that Mississippi State should catch the L here, and Alabama leaves with the dub. That's a 5-0 start, though. Next up, we've got the 4-game stretch that I'm talking about. Georgia at home, Tennessee on the road, Texas A&M win, LSU loss. I think Alabama at worst goes 1-3 in this stretch, but middling to, partially favoring Alabama. I think that they can go 3-1, maybe 2-2. You just take the 2 road losses, you win at home, or you beat Georgia at home, you beat Tennessee on the road, and then you lose to Texas A&M and LSU. Vice versa, you could swap it any way you'd like it. I have them going 3-1 in this stretch. I don't think Tennessee is nearly as good as they were a couple seasons ago when they beat Alabama. They've got a lot of question marks at quarterback, the offense. Josh Heupel's a good offensive coach. We'll see what he could do with the program here. But closing out the season for Alabama, you got 3 games at Vanderbilt, Chattanooga at home, Auburn at home. That Vanderbilt team is nowhere near as good as they were 2 seasons ago when they beat Alabama. Diego Pavia is gone. Eli Stowers is gone. The defensive talent there is also gone. I believe they're returning Cedric Alexander, and that's really about it in terms of the big names from Vanderbilt. Chattanooga, obviously FCS program, not going to have any competition there. Auburn at home. Auburn, now this game could be more exciting than you'd like to believe, but I don't believe Alabama has lost against Auburn at home since Cam Newton beat them back in 2010. I could be wrong about that. Alabama Auburn fans, check me on that. That being said, my ceiling for this Alabama team is 12-0. They can win every single game on their schedule. The floor, in my opinion, 8-4. I think they could lose all 4 of these games in the middle of the season. Georgia and Texas A&M might have a step up on Alabama in terms of being a playoff contender. LSU and Tennessee on the road in Neyland and Tiger Stadium, those are dangerous places to play. You could drop all 4 of those games, but realistically speaking, if you drop all 4 of those games, I just don't see it possible for Alabama to lose anything else. So that's my preview for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Let me know what you think of this. Will Kalen DeBoer have more of a hot seat than he has starting this season at the end of the year? Let me know that in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.